came home to silence, but what he heard next made him freeze at the door. The door swung open with more force than necessary that evening. Raymond stood in the doorway of his London townhouse, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion, his eyes carrying the weight of another endless day. The autumn rain had soaked through his coat, but he barely noticed. He was too tired to care, too numb to feel anything beyond the familiar ache that had become his constant companion. 2 years. It had been 2 full years since his world shattered into 1,000 pieces. 2 years since he lost Jessica, his beloved wife, just moments after she brought their twin sons into the world. The doctors had tried everything, but sometimes life makes decisions that no amount of money or medicine can reverse. She had slipped away so quickly, leaving him standing in that hospital corridor, holding 2 newborn babies, completely alone. Since that terrible day, silence had moved into their home like an unwelcome guest who refused to leave. The townhouse, once filled with Jessica's laughter and music, now echoed with emptiness. Raymond had tried to keep going, tried to be the father his boys needed, but grief had wrapped itself around his heart so tightly that he could barely breathe, let alone parent. He worked constantly, staying late at his office in the city, sometimes sleeping on the couch there rather than coming home to face the memories. The photographs on the walls, Jessica's favorite chair by the window, the smell of her perfume that still lingered in their bedroom. It was all too much, too painful, too impossible to bear. His sons, little Jacob and Thomas, had become shadows of themselves. They barely spoke, barely ate, barely lived. They moved through the house like ghosts, their eyes empty and distant. Raymond had hired the best help money could buy. Therapists, child psychologists, specialists from across Europe. Nothing worked. The boys remained trapped in their grief, and so did he. But then, as Raymond stood dripping in the hallway that evening, something impossible happened. He heard it. Laughter. Real, genuine, unrestrained laughter. The sound of children playing, squealing with delight, completely lost in joy. Raymond's briefcase slipped from his fingers and landed on the floor with a dull thud. He stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid that any sound he made might shatter this beautiful impossibility. His heart hammered against his ribs as confusion and hope waged war inside his chest. Slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal, he walked toward the living room. Each step felt like a lifetime. And then he saw them. Jacob and Thomas were on the floor, rolling around, their faces bright red with laughter. Their small bodies shook with giggles as they clung to a young woman's skirt, calling out her name with pure happiness. The woman herself stood in the center of this chaos, smiling gently as she wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron. She had kind eyes, the sort of eyes that seemed to understand pain without needing explanation. She laughed along with the boys, her voice warm and genuine, as if nothing in the world mattered more than this moment. Raymond felt his knees weaken. Tears burned behind his eyes, tears he had been holding back for 2 years, tears he thought had dried up completely. For the first time since Jessica died, he felt something other than grief. He felt hope. Small and fragile, like a candle flame in the wind, but real. Undeniably real. His house was no longer a tomb. His sons were no longer unreachable. Something had changed, something fundamental and profound. And he realized with startling clarity that while he had been drowning in sorrow, life had somehow found a way back into his home. The day had started the same way every day started for the past 2 years. Raymond woke up in his office, his neck stiff from another night spent on the leather couch, an empty whiskey glass on the desk beside him. Morning light filtered through the Venetian blinds, casting stripes across the paperwork he had been staring at before exhaustion finally claimed him. Going home had become unbearable. Every room held memories of Jessica. The kitchen where she used to dance while cooking breakfast. The garden where she had planned to teach the boys how to grow vegetables. Their bedroom, where he could still see her sitting by the window, reading with one hand resting on her pregnant belly, smiling at some secret conversation she was having with the babies growing inside her. So he stayed away. He buried himself in work, in meetings, in spreadsheets and conference calls. Anything to avoid the silence, the emptiness, the crushing reality that she was gone and never coming back. But that morning, something pushed him to leave the office earlier than usual. Perhaps it was exhaustion finally winning, or perhaps it was something else, something he could not name. He gathered his things and walked to his car, the London streets already busy with morning traffic. The drive home felt strange, longer than usual. His mind wandered through memories he usually kept locked away. Jessica's laugh. The way she used to touch his face when he worried too much. her excitement when they learned they were having twins. The last words she had whispered to him before the delivery. "Take care of our boys, Raymond. Promise me." He had promised. But he had failed. How could he take care of them when he could barely take care of himself? When he could not even look at them without seeing her eyes staring back at him? Traffic crawled. Red lights seemed to last forever. Every turn brought him closer to the townhouse, closer to the grief that waited inside. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as his chest tightened with familiar anxiety. But when he finally pulled into the driveway and approached the front door, he heard something that stopped him completely. Laughter. Wild, uncontrollable, pure childhood laughter. The kind of sound he had not heard in 2 years. The kind of sound he thought his sons had forgotten how to make. His hand trembled as he unlocked the door and pushed it open slowly. The scene before him seemed impossible, like something from a dream. Jacob and Thomas, his quiet, broken, unreachable sons, were laughing so hard they could barely breathe. They sat on the back of the young woman, the new nanny, their faces glowing with pure joy. A jump rope was tied around her waist, and she was on her hands and knees, pretending to be a horse. Little Thomas stood in front of her, gripping the other end of the rope, pulling with all his 3-year-old strength while shouting, "Faster, faster." The woman played along beautifully, making neighing sounds, pretending to gallop, acting as if this were the most important job in the world. She was completely present with them, completely engaged, completely there in a way that made Raymond realize how absent he had been. His sons had not laughed like this since before Jessica died. They had become so quiet, so withdrawn, so terrified of life itself. They woke screaming most nights, calling for a mother who would never answer. They barely ate. They stared at walls with empty eyes. Every specialist Raymond consulted had given him the same helpless look, the same carefully worded explanations that meant nothing could be done except wait and hope. But here they were laughing. Actually laughing. With a woman who had only been working for them for a few days. Raymond's eyes moved to the small Bible sitting on the side table near where the nanny, Rose was her name, had placed her coat. He remembered her first day, how she had stood outside the townhouse door for several minutes, her eyes closed, her lips moving in silent prayer before she even rang the bell. He had watched her from the window, confused and slightly annoyed. What kind of person prayed before accepting a job? But she had been the only candidate who had not looked at the boys with pity. The only one who had smiled at them with genuine warmth, rather than professional sympathy. So he had hired her, mostly out of desperation, expecting her to quit within a week like all the others. Yet here she was on the floor, covered in rope and children, laughing as if joy were the easiest thing in the world. How had she done this? How had she reached children that the best therapists in London could not help? Children who had been examined, analyzed, medicated, and counseled by experts with impressive degrees and expensive hourly rates? Raymond felt something crack inside his chest. Frustration melted into confusion, confusion into gratitude, gratitude into something he had not felt in so long he barely recognized it. Wonder. Then Rose noticed him standing in the doorway. The laughter vanished from her face instantly, replaced by fear. Her eyes went wide as she quickly helped the boys off her back and stood up, smoothing her dress, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. The boys turned too, their smiles fading when they saw their father. The joy drained from the room like water from a broken glass. Raymond's heart sank. Even now, his presence brought sadness. But he forced himself to smile, gentle and genuine, fighting against every instinct to turn and walk away. "Continue playing," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Come see me in my study when the boys go down for their nap." And then, before he could ruin the moment further, he turned and walked away, leaving the sound of returning laughter echoing behind him. As Raymond climbed the stairs to his study, his mind raced with questions that had no easy answers. How could someone with no medical training achieve what years of professional therapy never could? He had spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on specialists. He had followed every instruction, implemented every technique, bought every recommended book and toy and treatment. And yet a young woman with nothing but patience and an old Bible had reached his children in less than a week. Was it faith? Was it something about her spirit, her presence, her way of being? Was God real? And if so, why had he taken Jessica but sent Rose? These were questions Raymond had stopped asking 2 years ago, questions he had buried under work and whiskey and willful numbness. But they surfaced now, insistent and impossible to ignore. That evening, when Raymond finally emerged from his study, he found another scene that stopped him in his tracks. The dining room table was set beautifully, something that had not happened since Jessica died. Rose sat with Jacob and Thomas, their small hands joined together, their heads bowed. Rose's lips moved quietly as she prayed, her voice too soft for Raymond to hear the words, but he could see the peace on her face. The boys followed her lead, their little heads bowed, their eyes squeezed shut with childish concentration. They did not understand all the words, but they understood the feeling. Safety. Love. Connection. Raymond did not interrupt. He simply stood in the doorway, watching this small miracle unfold. When the prayer ended, Rose began feeding them, patiently encouraging each bite with gentle words. No forcing, no frustration, just warmth and persistence. And the boys ate willingly, more than they had eaten in weeks. Then Jacob looked up, his eyes scanning the room until they found Raymond standing in the shadows. And then he said it. The word Raymond thought he would never hear again. Daddy. The single word hit Raymond like a physical blow. His knees nearly buckled. His throat closed completely, and tears he could not control streamed down his face. He had not heard that word in 2 years. Not since the day he buried Jessica and lost himself in the process. Jacob had stopped calling him Daddy after the funeral. Both boys had. They called him nothing at all, avoiding his presence whenever possible, as if his grief were contagious and they feared catching more of it. But now, his son had called him Daddy again. And with that single word, something inside Raymond began to heal. Rose noticed immediately. She saw the tears, understood their meaning without explanation. Gently, she wiped Jacob's mouth and smiled at Raymond, giving him space, giving him permission to feel without judgment. She understood, somehow, that this moment was sacred. That night, as Raymond lay in bed for the first time in months, he realized something profound. Healing does not arrive with fanfare. It does not announce itself with trumpets and proclamations. It comes quietly, disguised as ordinary moments. A child's laughter. A shared meal. A single word spoken after 2 years of silence. And for the first time since Jessica died, Raymond allowed himself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, they might survive this after all. If this story is touching your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share these powerful stories with others who need hope and inspiration. Let's spread this message together. Now let's continue. The weeks that followed brought changes so subtle that Raymond almost missed them at first. But Rose understood something that all the expensive therapists had not. Broken hearts need safety before they can heal. They need routine, consistency, and the gentle certainty that tomorrow will come and it will be okay. So Rose created structure where there had been chaos. Every morning began the same way. She opened the curtains in the boys' room at the same time, letting soft morning light spill across their beds. She spoke to them in gentle voices, never rushing, never demanding. She said a quiet prayer, not forcing them to participate, simply offering it like a gift they could accept or ignore. Then came playtime. Simple games at first. Blocks and toy cars and picture books. Nothing complicated, nothing overwhelming. Just presence and attention and the steady message that they were safe, they were loved, they were seen. Meals happened at the same time every day, at the same table, with the same gentle routine. Rose never fought them about food, never turned eating into a battle. She simply offered, encouraged, and trusted that hungry children would eventually eat when they felt safe enough to do so. But the nights were the hardest. Jacob and Thomas had terrible nightmares. They woke screaming, calling for their mother, their small bodies shaking with fear and confusion. For 2 years, these nights had destroyed Raymond. He would stand outside their door, paralyzed by his own grief, unable to go in, unable to help. But Rose went in. Every single time. She never rushed them, never told them to be strong or to stop crying. She sat with them in the darkness, humming soft songs, praying quietly, her hand resting gently on their backs. Sometimes she stayed for 10 minutes. Sometimes she stayed for hours. Slowly, gradually, something shifted. 1 night passed without screaming. Then 2 nights. Then a full week. The nightmares did not disappear completely, but they became less frequent, less intense. And when they came, the boys learned they did not have to face them alone. Then came words. The silence that had filled the house like thick fog began to lift. Jacob spoke first, hesitant and quiet, asking Rose for water during breakfast. Such a small thing, but Raymond had stopped breathing when he heard it. His son's voice, clear and purposeful, asking for something he needed. Thomas followed soon after. Short sentences at first, then longer ones. Questions about the toys they were playing with, observations about the birds in the garden, comments about the food on their plates. Normal, ordinary, beautiful words that proved they were still in there, still present, still capable of connecting with the world. And then came laughter. Real laughter, the kind that bubbles up from deep inside and cannot be contained. It started small, quiet giggles during playtime. But it grew stronger, louder, more confident. The sound of it filled the townhouse, chasing away shadows that had lingered for 2 years. Rose never stopped tears when they came. She never told the boys to be brave or to move on or to think about happy things instead. When they cried, she let them cry. She held them, listened to them, validated their pain without trying to fix it. She understood that grief does not disappear. It transforms. It becomes something you carry differently. One rainy afternoon, Thomas looked up from his toys with serious eyes and asked the question that had been hanging over them all like a storm cloud. "Where's Mummy?" The room went completely still. Rose did not panic. She did not deflect. She simply knelt beside Thomas, taking his small hands in hers, and spoke the truth with gentle honesty. "Your mummy loved you more than anything in the world," she said softly. "She wanted so much to hold you and watch you grow. But sometimes, even when we want something very badly, our bodies cannot do what our hearts want them to do. Your mummy's body stopped working, and she had to go to heaven. Is she coming back?" Jacob asked, his voice breaking. "No, sweetheart," Rose said, tears running down her own cheeks. "She is not coming back to this house. But she is always with you in a different way. In your heart. In your memories. In every good thing you do, and every kind word you speak. She watches over you from heaven, and she is so proud of the brave boys you are becoming." The twins cried then, deep wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very center of their small bodies. But they cried together, held safely in Rose's arms. And when the tears finally stopped, they were not broken by them. They were lighter, as if something heavy had finally been set down. Raymond watched from the hallway, his own tears streaming silently down his face. He had never been able to answer that question when the boys asked it before. He had frozen, changed the subject, left the room. But Rose had walked straight into the pain and sat with them there until it became bearable. After that day, something fundamental shifted in the household. The boys began seeking out their father in ways they had not done since Jessica died. They sat beside him on the couch instead of staying across the room. Small hands slipped into his without warning when they walked through the house. They leaned against his legs while he worked, not asking for anything, simply wanting to be near him. At first, Raymond did not know what to do with this affection. He had been absent for so long, lost in his own grief, that he had forgotten how to be a father. But Rose helped him, gently encouraging him to read bedtime stories, to play simple games, to join them for meals. The first time Raymond sat at the dinner table with his sons, his hands shook so badly he could barely hold his fork. Rose had prepared Jessica's favorite recipe, shepherd's pie, and the smell of it brought back so many memories that Raymond almost left the room. But Jacob looked at him with such hope in his eyes that Raymond forced himself to stay. Rose led them in prayer, her voice calm and steady. The boys bowed their heads and repeated the words after her. Raymond kept his eyes open at first, too cynical, too hurt, too angry at a God who had taken his wife. But as he listened to the simple words, thanking God for food and family and another day together, something in his chest loosened slightly. That night, he slept in his own bed for the first time in 6 months. He had been avoiding the bedroom, unable to face the empty space where Jessica used to sleep. But somehow that evening, he found the courage to climb the stairs, open the door, and lie down in the darkness. He did not sleep well. Memories flooded through him, both beautiful and painful. But he stayed there, and when morning came, he felt something he had not felt in 2 years. Not happiness, exactly, but something close to it. Peace, perhaps. Or at least the beginning of peace. The house began to change. Toys appeared in the hallways, evidence of children who felt safe enough to play. Footsteps ran up and down the stairs where silence had once ruled absolutely. Laughter echoed through rooms that had felt like tombs. The townhouse was no longer haunted by grief. It was becoming a home again. Raymond began joining the evening prayers. Not because faith came easily to him, it did not, but because hope had returned, fragile and new, and he wanted to protect it. He sat with his sons, holding their hands, listening to Rose's gentle words, and sometimes, when he was brave enough, he added his own. "Thank you for bringing Rose to us," he prayed one evening, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for giving me my sons back. Thank you for reminding me that life can be beautiful again." The boys squeezed his hands tightly, and Rose smiled at him with such warmth that Raymond had to look away before he started crying. One evening, several weeks after that first moment of laughter, Raymond called Rose into his study. She came nervously, her hands folded in front of her, clearly worried that she had done something wrong. Perhaps she had overstepped, perhaps he was unhappy with her methods, perhaps he was going to let her go. But Raymond stood when she entered, something he never did for staff. He gestured for her to sit, and she did, perched on the edge of the chair, her eyes wide with concern. "Rose," Raymond began, then stopped, unsure how to say what he needed to say. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I do not want you to think of yourself as just a nanny anymore." She looked confused, almost frightened. Raymond continued quickly, before he lost his nerve. "You brought my children back to life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For 2 years, I watched them disappear a little more each day. I spent everything I had trying to help them. The best doctors, the best therapists, the best specialists money could buy. None of them could reach Jacob and Thomas. None of them could break through the wall of grief that surrounded them." Tears filled Rose's eyes, but Raymond kept going. "But you did. You walked into our broken home with nothing but faith and kindness, and you performed a miracle. You gave them back their laughter. You gave them back their voices. You gave them back their childhood." Raymond's voice broke, and he had to pause to collect himself. Rose waited silently, tears streaming down her face. "You brought me back, too," Raymond continued. "I was drowning in grief, and I did not even realize it. I had given up on everything, happiness, hope, life itself. I was just existing, waiting for time to pass, waiting for the pain to end. But you showed me that healing is possible. That joy can return. That love does not die, it just changes shape." He stood and walked around the desk, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. "I want you to stay," he said firmly. "Not as staff. Not as an employee. As family. This will always be your home, for as long as you want it. You belong here, with us. We need you, Rose. I need you. Not just to care for my sons, but to help me remember how to be their father." Rose covered her mouth with both hands, sobbing openly now. Raymond took her hands gently in his. "I cannot pay you enough for what you have given us," he said softly. "No salary in the world could match the value of what you have done. So I am not asking you to work for us anymore. I am asking you to be part of our family. To stay with us, not because you are obligated to, but because you want to. Because we love you, and we cannot imagine our lives without you now." Rose could barely speak through her tears. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. Raymond smiled, a real smile, the kind he had not worn in years. "Say yes." She nodded, unable to form words, and Raymond pulled her into a hug. They stayed like that for a long moment, two broken people who had found unexpected healing in each other's presence. From that day forward, everything changed. Rose was no longer an employee. She was family in every sense that mattered. She ate at the table as an equal, not as staff. Her opinions were valued, her presence was celebrated, her love was returned tenfold. The boys flourished under this new arrangement. They had their father back, present and engaged in ways he had not been since their mother died. And they had Rose, steady and loving, providing the maternal warmth they desperately needed. Raymond began sleeping in his own bed every night. He stopped drinking alone in his office. He came home at reasonable hours, eager to see his sons, eager to share meals with his unexpected family. He laughed again, awkwardly at first, as if he had forgotten how the sound was supposed to feel. But gradually laughter became easier, more natural, more frequent. The house filled with life. Birthday parties happened. Holiday traditions were created. Photographs were taken and hung on walls that had been bare for too long. The garden bloomed again, tended by small hands that learned to love growing things. And through it all, Rose remained the steady center, the anchor that kept them grounded when grief tried to pull them under. She never tried to replace Jessica. She honored her memory while gently helping them build a new life around the space her absence had created. Years passed. Jacob and Thomas grew into confident, happy boys who remembered their mother with love rather than overwhelming sadness. They spoke of her often, sharing memories, looking at photographs, keeping her alive in their hearts without letting grief consume them. Raymond healed too. He never remarried, but he learned to live fully again. He found joy in his son's accomplishments, peace in quiet evenings at home, gratitude for the unexpected blessing Rose had brought into their lives. And Rose herself bloomed. The frightened young woman who had stood outside the townhouse praying for courage transformed into a confident, beloved member of a family that could not imagine life without her. One evening, many years after that first day of laughter, the family sat together in the garden watching the sunset. Jacob and Thomas, now teenagers, were discussing their plans for university. Raymond listened with pride, marveling at the strong young men they had become. Rose sat beside him, her hair touched with gray now, her face lined with laughter and love. She caught Raymond's eye and smiled. "Thank you," Raymond said quietly, so only she could hear. "For everything. For saving us." Rose shook her head gently. "I did not save you," she replied. "God did. I was just obedient enough to show up and love you through it." Raymond thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "Then thank you for showing up. And for loving us. We would have been lost without you." The moral of this story is simple but profound. In our darkest moments, when professional solutions fail and hope seems impossible, sometimes healing comes through the simplest gifts: faith, consistency, and unconditional love. Money cannot buy the human connection that broken hearts need to heal. Degrees and expertise have their place, but they cannot replace genuine presence and compassion. Rose's power was not in her credentials or her methods. It was in her willingness to simply be there, fully present, offering love without conditions or expectations. She showed up every day with patience and faith, trusting that small acts of kindness would eventually break through walls of grief. For Raymond and his sons, the lesson was equally important. Healing does not mean forgetting those we have lost. It means learning to carry their memory with love rather than devastation. It means allowing ourselves to feel joy again without guilt. It means accepting help from unexpected places and recognizing that sometimes the people who save us are not the ones we expect. Life brings unbearable losses, but it also brings unexpected blessings if we are brave enough to let them in. The Derrick family lost Jessica, and that loss would always be part of their story. But they gained Rose, and in doing so, they learned that love does not run out when someone dies. It multiplies. It transforms. It finds new expressions in new relationships. And in the end, that is what saved them. Not medication or therapy or time, though those things helped. What truly saved them was allowing love back into their home, in whatever form it chose to arrive. That is the miracle. That is the hope. That is the promise that even in our deepest grief, life will find a way to bloom again. Thank you for watching this story with us today. If it moved you, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next heartwarming tale. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, remember that healing comes in the most unexpected ways.